What's going on, everyone? Brandon here from Gearist. Today we are taking a look at the Adidas Adizero Adios Pro number 3. Before we get into the full review of this shoe, please don't forget to like, share, subscribe, all of those things. Click the notification bell so that you can see when we put up our latest video. And we've actually got another one coming later today and then another one tomorrow, What the Friday. If you're not familiar with that series, please check it out. And now, let's get into the shoe. We're gonna do things a little bit different today, and that is that we're gonna tell you some specs and takeaways right up front before we get into the actual review. First up, the weight. Now, this is a men's size 11, right? This is the shoe that I wear. It is 245 grams or 8.6 ounces. In terms of the stack height, we've got 39.5 millimeters in the heel, 33 millimeters in the forefoot for an overall drop of 6.5 millimeters. In terms of sizing, it does run true to size for me. I actually, it can run a little bit long. We'll talk about that. So if you're kind of in between sizes, I would err on the smaller of those two sizes. But with that said, as is kind of the thing with Adidas, it's not super wide. What is it best for? Well, I mean, race day. This is a racing shoe. Whether that, for me personally, I would go 10K to marathon, maybe even plus because of the type of foam, and we're going to talk about that as we get into the review. But frankly, you could work out in it. It's just not going to have the durability of a true training shoe. Now, in terms of price tag, it did originally come up at $250, and if you want particular colorways, you may still have to pay that. But right now, if you click the links down below, you can see that this guy right here is coming in at about $175 or just under. And now let's get into the actual review. You know, it's one thing to see super shoes on the feet of these world marathon major winners and all that kind of stuff. It's another thing to get it onto your foot. And for me, even though this is version 3 of the shoe, this was the first time that I had a chance to get into this model, even in previous versions. I really was excited to do that and see exactly what it could take my slow ass and how fast it could make me go. You know, speed is such a very relative thing. A number of years ago actually, I had a podcast. This is back in like 2009. A lot of people listened, and at the time it was interesting because I actually got some hate as I started to become faster because I was really paying attention to what I was doing in terms of my own training and working toward other things. And it never got super fast, right? Like my cruiser runs would be around 7:30 a mile. They are not now 7:30 a mile, but I would go out and I would lay that down for 20 miles and it was no big deal. People didn't really like that. So let me preface all of this by saying that speed is very relative. It's relative to your efforts, your age, your fitness, injuries, and things like that. And for me, coming back after a car crash that happened in 2018, speed wasn't exactly on the menu. But for the first time in a long time, I really decided with this shoe and some other things that I've been working with lately to really kind of let speed take the wheel. Now, with all that in mind, let's get into talking about the outsole. The outsole of the Adidas Adizero Adios Pro 3, that's a hell of a name, is maximally covered but minimally thin with Continental rubber. Now here's an interesting thing. If you look at it, very minimal, like very thin layers of rubber, but it's Conti rubber. We're going to get into what that means in a moment, but you can see that it actually has quite a bit of coverage on the bottom of the shoe. This green is Conti rubber, back here, all of this. Now what you will see is a few cutaways, right? So number one, we've got this right here in the arch, this instep where you can see those Energy Rods 2.0, which we'll talk about more in the midsole and ride sections of the shoe. You've also kind of got this middle line right here, this midline that runs right back through the rear foot, and then this distinctive cutaway, right? I'll see, there we go. You can see it right there. So that guy right there, interestingly, I was like, what the hell is that for? Well, frankly, most people aren't going to wear in these areas, right? There's no need for abrasion protection in those areas for most people. Simultaneous to that, it helps to shave a little bit of weight. Now, the two primary areas of rubber on this shoe are going to be, or types of rubber, I would say, are right up here, the black rubber, and then this green piece. They're all Continental rubber, as you can see by the Continental branding right there. Now, this black material, that's gonna be the more abrasion resistant, right? This is where you're gonna put the bulk of any rubbing and towing off and things like that on this shoe. The green up here is actually stickier. It's tackier. Yes, it still has a lot of abrasion resistance because Continental rubber does a good job of that. But this is where if you're really kind of putting it down and getting up on the toe and kind of going around turns and things like that, this is going to be a stickier compound. In both cases, the rubber is smooth. There are no real lugs. These little cutaways here, just that. They're cutaways simply to kind of take away a little bit of weight where it's possible. But there's no like traction devices that you might see even on a lot of other road shoes. As for my experience with this, the first thing we'll look at is durability. I have about 80 miles on this shoe, and I will say that it's really in quite good shape. Now, I will admit that I'm not sure exactly how many miles you're going to get out of it. You may be able to get 300-400 if you're a super efficient runner, but this is a race day shoe, right? This is a racer. This is not going to be your daily driver training shoe, especially not on trails and things like that. This is a road racing shoe, period. So what about traction? Well, Continental does traction really, really well. I just happen to have this sitting beside me. This is a trail shoe. This is the Raven Boost by Adidas. It also uses, this, again, trail, uses Continental rubber. One of my favorite and grippiest shoe compounds that there is. And this really held up to that. I did mostly roads, sidewalks, asphalt, pavement, you know, all these kind of things that you might be on. And the grip was amazing, like bar none. It's fantastic. I love the grip of Continental rubber. They do such an amazing job. I did one run on a road at high altitude because I needed to get in some kind of like more concentrated miles at high altitude. And it was a partially snowed over road. This is about 3 weeks ago. Right now it is December 1st, 2022. So this is about 3 weeks ago. And the road was probably 50% dry, 50% snowed on. What I noticed is that running on ice, it doesn't really matter what shoe you're in unless you're wearing a studded shoe like one of the Solomon things or Ice Bug or something like that. On snow, running shoes that have any sort of traction lug is going to do pretty well. But this guy has none of that. So I will just caution you, if you decide to go running this in a snowy or icy setting, there's no grip. So just be careful. There's a very good chance that you're going to slip. Just be careful. And it's not a knock on the shoes, certainly not. But if you're concerned with that, I would be aware. Now on rainy stuff, right? So wet stuff, snow melt, things like that. On pavement, it did really well. Like it gripped fantastic. I wasn't concerned at all. But it's that snowy stuff. I don't know why you would be wearing a marathon racing shoe in the snow anyway. Now as we move into the midsole, what we find is 2 layers, count them, 2, of Light Strike Pro foam. Now, you can see kind of this line right here. That's where, maybe you can see that line. That's where the 2 layers kind of come together. While other midsole foams like Boost from Adidas gets a lot of play, the Light Strike Pro is certainly their most resilient material. And sandwiched in between those 2 pieces of Light Strike foam is the Energy Rods 2.0, which you can see kind of exposed right there. And here's a picture of what those look like right here. Taking a look at the Energy Rods 2.0, you can see here that in version 1, all the Energy Rods were very, very much independent, right? They ran underneath each metatarsal, up through the metatarsal heads and into the toes. In version 2.0, it actually is connected into one cohesive piece by that kind of loop thing that you can see in the heel there. Each of the carbon rods, and the whole entire piece is carbon fiber, in fact, comes out of that loop. As you can see, it kind of forms a spider web under the heel. Continuing some of the cutaways that we saw in the outsole piece, the midsole of this does have some cutaways of its own. Right here we can see this in the midsole and the instep right there. Again, that toe piece. And again, back in the heel here, these are really going to serve to shave weight in areas where it's not necessary. Now, as for my experience, I have to say that as my running evolves, as I get older, things like that, I find that my tolerance for responsive cushioning is that much greater. I will get into the ride aspects of this shoe as we talk more, but let's really focus on the midsole right now. First, Light Strike Pro foam, this foam that we're seeing right here. Now, I will say that it took about 10 miles for me to really kind of feel like it was broken in. And typically, I don't really need a break-in period. Yes, I can feel an evolution of a shoe, but in this, the first 10 miles, I was like, what's going on here? With that said, I can't really tell if it was the shoe getting used to me, like the Light Strike Foam Pro breaking in, Light Strike Pro foam breaking in. If it was the shoe getting used to me or me getting used to the shoe, I'm really not quite sure about that. Either way, this midsole foam is really a lot of fun. And as a marathon racing shoe, calming down those micro vibrations, those kind of when your foot hits the ground, it vibrates all the way up the leg and really fatigues the muscles very quickly. This is a super great addition. As for midsole geometry, the toe spring of this is actually kind of a pretty dramatic toe spring. But if you pay attention to where the black part, right, so the upper of the shoe is, it's not as dramatic as it appears on the outsole midsole area. The other thing that you'll notice is that the toe spring is very deep. It's all the way like under and toe spring, for those of you who don't know, is that upper curve at the front end of a shoe. It's right way back under kind of the middle of the metatarsal heads, and that's quite a bit back there. About those cutouts, the foam cutouts that I mentioned a second ago, I'm a pretty natural runner, very flat foot, but when it comes to my gait, I'm pretty neutral. I will say that here and there I can get a little bit of supination, and in those cases, supination being like where your foot kind of tracks outwardly, right? As opposed to pronation where it tracks inwardly, right? So medially versus laterally. So for me, I did here and there, just here and there, notice this cutaway, but it wasn't jarring, it wasn't uncomfortable, it was just kind of like, oh, hey, there's nothing there. And in fact, I actually felt like getting to that area connected me more to exactly what was going on in my foot. As for the Energy Rods 2.0, the first thing let me say is that those rods and kind of the windiness being under the heel and all that, at no time did a Princess and the Pea situation show up where I was like, oh my God, there's this uncomfortable rod under my foot. I never felt any of that. As for their springiness and response, I will tell you this. It's kind of a two-step thing, which again we'll touch on in the ride section, but you feel the cushion of the Light Strike Pro Foam, and then you feel kind of that leaf spring pop, because this sucker's freaking rigid, right? So you feel that leaf spring pop. One of the things that I would say, and this is kind of a ride thing, but I'll touch on it here, is that the heavier you are as a runner, the more you're going to kind of give that energy to it. I don't think that the pop is going to increase or decrease either way, but it's going to respond differently depending on your body weight. Okay, let's talk about the upper of this sucker. Now this is made primarily from Adidas Cellar Mesh, which is meant to be very, very open and breathable, which it certainly is. And mostly this is single piece mesh construction. Internally, there is a bit of a support structure. You can't really see it. It kind of runs, you can kind of see it, this lighter area right here. So that actually runs as like a strap up and across that part of your foot. And it actually integrates with these two lowest eyelets here, which are kind of like fly wire lacing that happens in some Nike shoes. And that's both on the medial and the lateral side. So the tongue, which is not gusseted, and this is important to notice, is very thin and flat, okay? So there's no real additional padding there to protect laces being tied down really tightly on the foot, so you're probably going to feel that. There is a loop here, kind of that comes right up out of the vamp, this being the vamp area, that comes up into the throat between the laces a little bit. And then again, another loop up here, right, as you can see under the Adizero words right there. That's going to keep that tongue in place and keep it from sliding. Cushioning around the heel, kind of the heel cup and collar area, is very minimal. It's actually pretty thin. You can probably see right there. There's just not much going on. Here's an interesting thing about it. The fabric, as you slide your finger kind of into the shoe, like downward, the fabric is pretty smooth, but it's got this shark skin thing sort of going on. So when you pull up, there's actually quite a bit of like grain going down. So it's, I'm assuming, meant to hold that foot in place by way of friction against your sock or your shoe or your foot or whatever. Rounding out the upper, and this I think is, it's a small thing, but it's one of my favorite things, is this heel pull. You see the heel pull right there? Check this out. Boop. Now it's up. Boop. Now it's out of the way. Isn't that fun? So I actually like this. It's nice and soft, kind of felt material. You pull on it, pull the shoe on, and then just fold it down and out of the way. As for my experience, the first thing that I'll say is this upper, very, very wide open and breathable. I'm not really one to get hot feet or overly heated even on hot days, but if you are, this is probably going to go a long way toward that. The other thing that it does is that if you're in a race or something where there's water coming over you, right? If it's a marathon, you're going to aid stations, you're spilling water, Gatorade, all that kind of stuff that's going on to you. This is not going to hold on to water like that. It's not going to hold on to moisture, and that's great because it means there's not going to be added weight as you go along. The mesh is very lightweight and breathable. It's actually also kind of stiff. So on the outside, where it's not really going to matter, nice and smooth, all that kind of stuff. On the inside, it's a little scratchy, not gonna lie. So I've worn this just walking around barefoot, but I'm a pretty much socks all the time guy, at least when running, right? So when I wore this, I didn't notice anything. I did notice where there were a couple people online that had commented where the scratchiness of the fabric actually tore up some of their socks. I did not notice that in 80 miles. So take it for what it's worth. Just keep an eye out for that. So back to that tongue again. I mentioned a second ago that it is flat, very thin, all that stuff. Actually super supple and comfortable. Now, if you're somebody who is really hammering down on those laces, you're probably going to feel it because it's right on your foot, right? It's not something that is going to be like, oh, it's light and airy. No, it's going to feel because there's no padding protecting your foot from the laces below. And one thing I will mention about the tongue that you're going to want to keep an eye out for is that because it's so nice and soft and supple and all that stuff, if it gets folded over under kind of the side of the laces here, which you might not notice because you're tying your shoes and all that kind of stuff, If you tie your shoes while it's folded over, as you get into your run, you're going to feel pressure on that side. I did that a couple times, and then I was just checking each time before I laced up, and it was no big deal. Easy to fix, but just be aware of it. Because the tongue is so soft and supple, you may fold it over inadvertently. Speaking of lacing, here's an interesting thing about this. It's challenging to get it laced exactly the way that you're going to want to. For me, it took me a few runs of really kind of figuring out where I was going with it. Because of the rigidity of the midsole and those energy rods, I felt like I needed a little more cinching up on top, while not so much kind of around the midfoot over the arch there. So play around with it. Because it's rigid, you're going to feel, as you kind of put weight into it, you're going to feel the heel pull away from the heel of the shoe, pull away from the heel of your foot a little bit if it's not laced down exactly properly. But again, this being your race day shoe, if you really take the time to figure it out, all those problems go away. It's really just about being patient. All right, let's talk about the fit of the Adizero Adios Pro 3. Now, I have a size 11, as I mentioned earlier. This really fit me exactly where I would expect it to be. It's a little bit long, so just be aware of that. If you're somebody who falls in between sizes, as I mentioned earlier, if you're like, oh, I could go 10.5 or 11, go to the 10.5, because it's like a quarter size longer, half size longer than you might expect it to be. That said, because of that toe spring, it doesn't really affect it if you are on the larger side. For me, I felt perfectly comfortable in this. The other thing is that there's no wide option in this shoe. So if you have wide feet, this is probably not going to be the shoe for you. If you really want to try it out, go for it. But just a heads up, it's a unisex sizing shoe. There is no wide option, so buyer beware. Now, as we move into the fit of the different parts of this, as you can see, this being a racing flat, as we get toward the toe of the shoe, and if you could kind of ignore the lines there that kind of draw your eye pointy, it does come to a bit of a point. I mean, it's certainly set up like a racing flat, right? And that's fine. It is what it is. For me, I will say that additional slight length at the front really went a long way to making me very comfortable. At no point did I feel pinched into the toe of the shoe. So across the midfoot right here, this could be, depending on your foot, what your preferences are, all those sorts of things, this could be one of those places that's a little bit tricky to get laced up exactly how you want it. For me, I didn't really find that. Again, I have a very average foot, not high arch, not low arch, just an arch. It's just kind of normal. It wasn't a big deal, but I did like the way that the kind of narrowness, or not narrowness, but not wideness, really fit my foot very well through there, which was nice. Now the heel cup. Okay, so the rear foot, as I mentioned, this is probably one of those areas where it was definitely trickier to lace for me. One of the things that you'll notice is just how far forward the eyelets are placed. And for me, with really nailing that, it would have been great if it could have been back like a quarter inch and maybe a little bit higher, where I could really kind of get the heel a little bit more locked in. I did ultimately get it to a place where I was very, very comfortable with it, but it took some doing. So again, patience with getting this fit to your foot is really imperative, because once you get it in there, this seller mesh, this does not budge. There's no stretch to it. Like, it does not move. So be really sure that you're getting exactly what you want. Again, a race day shoe, make it where you want to be on race day for a long time, and you're going to be perfectly fine. But take the time and patience to get that set up right. As we start to talk about the ride, here's the thing. I mentioned earlier my kind of evolution in my tastes. And one of the things that we've noticed is that you can throw a bunch of foam in there to be very cushy. And that's what a lot of shoes did in the past. But now you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, right? You can put foam, and Adidas has not done this by just throwing a bunch of extra foam on there, but they've also made it responsive. And this is what a lot of shoes are doing by incorporating different sort of plates, whether it's a plastic or something like that, or it's a carbon fiber, whatever it is. They're really winding up in a place where they can have that cushion, but also the poppy goodness of that sort of a response. And with that response in some shoes now with a carbon fiber plate, in where it's all kind of one plate, even if it's shaped really cool. We've talked about some of those shoes recently. I like it so much. That leaf spring action and that pop is really fantastic. Then there's energy rods. Now, in the case of these energy rods, as you saw in the pictures, you can see them right here coming up under the metatarsals. Because the front end of those energy rods, 2.0 by the way, are independent, what you really notice is the ability of the foot to respond to how each metatarsal right? Each toe, with the tarsals, I guess, each of those wants to react to the ground. You're not tied into having one plate for everything. I am by no means saying that I don't adore a good carbon fiber plate in the midsole of a shoe, or even a rigid plastic plate or something like that. But in this case, that stood out to me. It felt really good and responsive and led to a connectedness with the ground that I really found myself enjoying as I went along. I'm going to come back now, and yes, this pertains to the ride, to the lacing of the shoe. That's one of the things that in any shoe, it's not unique to the shoe, that getting it laced just right for your foot, your gait, the terrain you're running on, all of those sorts of things can really make or break the ride of a shoe. I would encourage you to really take the time to do that, because when you have this shoe laced right, it's super poppy and super fun and super cushioned, although not like smushy cushion. It's that very springy cushion thing. If you want to take advantage of all these things and get the most out of this ride, take a second to make sure this is fitting you how you need it to fit. I think that's vitally important to really enjoy this shoe to its fullest. And you may be saying, yeah, but Brandon, isn't that the way that it is with all shoes? Yeah, it is, but some of those shoes are going to have a little bit of stretch in the upper, and where this doesn't have that, right? So getting it dialed to the way that you need it is what's important. Now guys, before we close out this review, please again, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. I want to hear what you think of this shoe, so let us know down below. Overall, I would say that this is a fantastic race day shoe. This is actually one that is crushing in the World Marathon Majors and other marathon races this year, and other races shorter than that. For me, again, 10K to marathon, I think this would be a fantastic shoe. It's really responsive, really fun to run in, very, very poppy. The cushion factors that kind of really dampen those micro vibrations in your legs are going to lead to fresher legs for longer, and that is key. At $250, not the cheapest thing in the world, I will say that, but it's a super shoe. I mean, what are you gonna do? But again, it's coming down right now at about $175 if you check those links down below. This is a really fantastic deal, and it also tells me, because those prices are coming down so quickly, even with this just having won the New York City Marathon a couple of weeks ago, or a month ago, 3 weeks, something like that, those aspects are meaning that they're working on the next iteration of the shoe, and I cannot wait to see what that entails. Thanks so much for watching today. I really appreciate it. We want to hear your thoughts. Have you run in this shoe? Previous versions? Are you looking to run in this shoe? Are you looking for the next thing? What's your super shoe? Let us know down in the comments below. Thanks so much for joining us today, guys. Take a look at the Adidas Adizero Adios Pro 3. Get out there, get sweaty. We'll see you next time.